The neon lights of Murphy's bar cast an eerie glow across the rain-soaked streets of downtown Seattle. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with cigarette smoke, and the low hum of conversation mixed with classic rock playing from the old jukebox in the corner. Sarah sat alone at the far end of the bar, nursing a glass of whiskey and observing the crowd with eyes that missed nothing. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another young woman unwinding after a long day at work, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a casual sweater that concealed the lean muscle beneath. What the patrons of Murphy's bar didn't know was that Sarah was Lieutenant Sarah of the Army's elite Delta Force, one of only a handful of women to ever earn that distinction. Tonight, however, she wasn't Sarah the soldier. She was playing the role of Tors, a freelance graphic designer who had recently moved to Seattle. This cover identity was part of a deep undercover operation that had taken months to establish. The mission was classified at the highest levels, involving the investigation of a suspected arms trafficking ring that had connections to several military installations along the West Coast. Sarah had been tracking a former Navy SEAL turned private military contractor, who intelligence suggested was selling stolen military hardware to domestic terrorist groups, was known to frequent Murphy's bar, using it as a meeting place for his illegal transactions. Sarah's job was to get close to him, gain his trust, and gather enough evidence to bring down his entire operation. It was dangerous work that required her to maintain her cover at all costs, even if it meant appearing vulnerable and defenseless. The door to the bar swung open, bringing with it a gust of cold air and 3 men in military fatigues. Sarah recognized them immediately as Marines based on their bearing and the unit patches on their uniforms. They were loud and clearly intoxicated, having likely spent the evening bar hopping around the downtown area. The tallest of the 3, a muscular man with close-cropped hair and aggressive eyes, caught sight of Sarah sitting alone and nudged his companions. "Look what we have here," he said loud enough for half the bar to hear. "A little lady drinking all by herself. That's not safe in a neighborhood like this." Sarah continued to sip her whiskey, keeping her expression neutral while internally cataloging every detail about the 3 men. The one appeared to be the leader, probably a corporal or sergeant based on his age and the way the others deferred to him. His name tape read Harrison. The second man was shorter and stockier, with dark hair and suspicious eyes that constantly scanned the room. The third was younger, probably a private, and seemed uncomfortable with his companion's behavior. Harrison approached the bar, his swagger exaggerated by alcohol. "Hey there, sweetheart. Name's Jake Harrison. These are my buddies, Tony and—" he gestured to his companions. "We just got back from a 6-month deployment overseas and we're looking to have some fun. How about you let us buy you a drink?" Sarah looked up at him with the practiced expression of a civilian woman who was both flattered and slightly nervous about the attention. "Thanks, but I'm fine with what I have," she said politely, turning back to her drink. Harrison's face darkened at the rejection. "Come on now, don't be like that. We're heroes, you know. We just spent 6 months fighting for your freedom. The least you could do is show a little appreciation." The bartender, an older man named Pete who had seen his share of trouble over the years, watched the interaction with growing concern. He had dealt with drunk before and knew how quickly things could escalate. "Maybe you boys should find a table and I'll send over some coffee," he suggested diplomatically. "Mind your own business, old man," Harrison snapped, his attention still focused on Sarah. "I'm talking to the lady here." Sarah could feel the tension building in the room. Other patrons were starting to notice the confrontation, some moving away from the bar area while others watched with morbid curiosity. She knew she had several options for dealing with the situation, but her cover identity limited her responses. Tors would be intimidated but polite, trying to defuse the situation without causing a scene. "Look, I appreciate the offer, but I'm just trying to have a quiet drink," Sarah said, attempting to sound conciliatory. "I'm sure there are plenty of other people here who would love to chat with you." Harrison moved closer, invading her personal space. The smell of alcohol was strong on his breath, and Sarah could see the anger building behind his eyes. "You think you're too good for us? Is that it? We risk our lives protecting ungrateful civilians like you, and this is the thanks we get." His friend Tony, the stocky one, placed a hand on Harrison's shoulder. "Maybe we should just let it go, Jake. She's not interested." "Shut up, Tony," Harrison growled, shrugging off his friend's hand. "I'm not done talking to Miss High and Mighty here." Sarah's training kicked in as she assessed the escalating threat. Harrison was clearly the type who didn't handle rejection well, especially when alcohol lowered his inhibitions. She could see his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides, a classic sign of someone preparing for violence. The younger Marine looked increasingly uncomfortable and kept glancing toward the door as if considering leaving. "Please, I don't want any trouble," Sarah said, playing up the frightened civilian act while simultaneously calculating distances and angles. She knew exactly how many steps it would take to reach the door, where the nearest weapons were located, and how to disable all three men if necessary. But Torres wouldn't know any of that. Harrison laughed coldly. "Trouble? Who said anything about trouble? I'm just trying to be friendly here, but you're being a real bitch about it." The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt her jaw clench involuntarily, but forced herself to maintain character. She had endured far worse during her military training and subsequent missions. A drunk Marine's verbal abuse was nothing compared to being captured and tortured by enemy forces during a classified operation in Afghanistan 2 years earlier. "I think you should leave me alone now," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying just a hint of steel that someone paying close attention might have noticed. Harrison apparently wasn't paying that kind of attention. Instead, he reached out and grabbed Sarah's wrist as she lifted her glass to her lips. "I'm tired of playing games with you, sweetheart. Why don't we go somewhere private where you can show me some proper gratitude?" The grab was a mistake on multiple levels. First, it escalated the situation from verbal harassment to physical assault. Second, it gave Sarah legal justification for self-defense. Third, and most importantly for Harrison's immediate, it triggered combat reflexes that had been honed through years of the most intensive military training in the world. For just a moment, Sarah's cover identity slipped. Her free hand moved with lightning speed toward Harrison's throat, stopping just inches away as she regained control. The movement was so fast that most people in the bar missed it entirely, but Harrison felt the wind from her hand and saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. "Let go of my wrist," Sarah said, her voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to giving orders that were obeyed without question. Harrison, however, was too drunk and too committed to his course of action to recognize the warning signs. Instead of releasing her, he tightened his grip. "You're coming with me whether you like it or not," he snarled. Sarah felt the familiar calm that always descended over her in combat situations. Time seemed to slow down as her mind automatically ran through dozens of potential responses, each calculated for maximum effectiveness with minimum collateral damage. She could break Harrison's wrist with a simple twist, disable all three Marines in under 10 seconds, or create enough chaos to slip away unnoticed. But any of those responses would blow her cover and potentially compromise a mission that had taken months to set up. The bartender had apparently seen enough. "That's it," Pete shouted, reaching for the phone behind the bar. "I'm calling the police." "Don't," Harrison commanded, pulling Sarah closer to him. "This is between me and the lady here. No need to involve the law in a simple misunderstanding." Sarah could feel Harrison's grip becoming more aggressive, and she noticed his friends positioning themselves to block potential escape routes. Tony had moved to her left side, while Young reluctantly took up position near the bar's exit. It was a coordinated movement that suggested these three had done this kind of thing before. The realization that she was dealing with serial predators rather than just drunk soldiers changed the entire dynamic of the situation. Sarah's mission parameters didn't include allowing herself to be assaulted or potentially kidnapped by three Marines who clearly had experience in intimidating and overpowering women. She would have to find a way to defend herself while maintaining her cover story. "Please," she said, deliberately making her voice shake. "You're hurting me. I'll buy you guys a round of drinks if you just let me go." Harrison's laugh was ugly. "Too late for that, sweetheart. You had your chance to be nice. Now we're going to have to do this the hard way." He began pulling her toward the back of the bar, where a narrow hallway led to the restrooms and a rear exit. Sarah allowed herself to be pulled along for a few steps, playing the terrified victim while actually memorizing the layout and looking for tactical advantages. The hallway was narrow, which would limit the Marines' ability to use their numbers against her. The lighting was poor, which could work in her favor. Most importantly, there were no innocent civilians in the back area who might get hurt if violence erupted. As they reached the entrance to the hallway, Sarah made her decision. She couldn't maintain her cover if it meant allowing these men to assault her, and she had a legal and moral obligation to protect herself. The mission would have to adapt to the new circumstances. "Last chance," she said quietly, though her words were meant more as a mental preparation for herself than a real warning to Harrison. "Let me go and walk away." Harrison's response was to shove her roughly against the wall at the entrance to the hallway. "Shut up and do what you're told," he growled, pressing his body against hers in a way that made his intentions crystal clear. That was when Sarah, the Delta Force operator, finally emerged from behind the tour's facade. Her first move was a classic disengagement technique that she had practiced thousands of times. She brought her hands up between Harrison's arms, then explosively drove her palms outward while simultaneously bringing her knee up toward his groin. The combination broke his grip on her wrist and sent him stumbling backward, gasping in pain and surprise. Before Tony or could react to their friend's sudden distress, Sarah had already moved into a combat stance that would have been immediately recognizable to anyone with military training. Her weight was balanced on the balls of her feet, her hands were positioned for both offense and defense, and her eyes had taken on the cold, calculating expression of a professional warrior. "What the hell?" Tony exclaimed, finally understanding that something had gone very wrong with their planned assault. Harrison recovered from the knee strike faster than most men would have, a testament to his Marine training and physical conditioning. But his recovery only served to fuel his rage rather than giving him the wisdom to retreat. "You little bitch, I'm going to make you pay for that." He charged at Sarah with the kind of straightforward, aggressive attack that worked well against untrained opponents, but was exactly the wrong approach against someone with her level of expertise. Sarah his charge easily, using his own momentum against him to send him crashing into the wall where she had been standing moments before. The sound of Harrison hitting the wall with considerable force finally penetrated the alcohol-fueled haze that had been clouding the judgment of his two companions. The youngest of the three took a step backward toward the main door of the bar. "Maybe we should just leave," he suggested nervously. But Tony was apparently cut from the same cloth as Harrison. Instead of de-escalating the situation, he pulled out a switchblade knife and moved to flank Sarah. "Hold still, you crazy bitch. This doesn't have to get worse than it already is." The appearance of the knife changed everything. What had started as a case of sexual harassment had now escalated to armed assault, and Sarah no longer had any obligation to pull her punches or worry about maintaining her civilian cover. Her training and experience had prepared her for exactly this type of situation, and her response was swift and decisive. She moved toward Tony with the fluid grace of a predator, closing the distance before he could effectively use the knife. Her left hand intercepted his knife arm, while her right delivered a precise strike to a pressure point on his neck. Tony dropped like a stone, the knife clattering harmlessly across the floor. Harrison, meanwhile, had peeled himself off the wall and was preparing for another attack. But this time he approached more cautiously, having finally realized that he was dealing with someone far more dangerous than he had initially assumed. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she waited for him to make his move, her entire body coiled like a spring. When Harrison finally committed to another attack, she was ready. She ducked under his wild swing, came up inside his guard, and delivered a series of strikes to his solar plexus and floating ribs that left him gasping and unable to continue fighting. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds, but it had completely transformed the atmosphere in Murphy's bar. The other patrons stared in stunned silence at the young woman who had just single-handedly defeated 3 trained Marines. Pete, the bartender, stood frozen behind the bar, his hand still reaching for the phone, but his eyes locked on the aftermath of the brief but decisive battle. The youngest Marine had apparently seen enough. He turned and fled through the front door, leaving his unconscious friend and his badly beaten companion behind. Sarah watched him go without making any attempt to stop him, then turned her attention to Harrison, who was still conscious but clearly in no condition to continue the fight. "Stay down," she advised him quietly. "This is over." Harrison looked up at her with a mixture of pain, confusion, and grudging respect. "You're military," he wheezed. "Special forces." Sarah didn't confirm or deny his assessment. Instead, she helped Tony into a sitting position and checked to make sure he was breathing normally. The pressure point strike she had used would leave him unconscious for several minutes but wouldn't cause any permanent damage. Harrison's injuries were more extensive but also non-permanent, consisting mainly of bruised ribs and wounded pride. "Pete," Sarah called to the bartender. "Call 911. These men need medical attention and the police will want to file a report." As she waited for the authorities to arrive, Sarah's mind was already working on how to salvage her undercover mission. The confrontation had blown her cover as Tor's the graphic designer, but it hadn't necessarily exposed her true identity or her connection to the military. She would need to come up with a plausible explanation for her fighting skills that wouldn't compromise the ongoing investigation into arms trafficking operation. The irony wasn't lost on her that 3 Marines had unknowingly attacked one of the most highly trained soldiers in the American military. They had picked the wrong woman on the wrong night, and their assumption that she would be an easy victim had cost them dearly. But for Sarah, this was just another obstacle to overcome in the pursuit of a much larger and more important mission. The Seattle Police Department arrived at Murphy's Bar within minutes of Pete's 911 call, their red and blue lights painting the wet streets in alternating colors. Detective Maria Santos was the first investigator on scene, a 15-year veteran with sharp eyes and an instinct for reading people that had served her well throughout her career. She took one look at the scene inside the bar and immediately recognized that this was no ordinary bar fight. Sarah remained seated at the bar, having resumed her position and ordered another whiskey while waiting for the police. To the casual observer, she appeared calm and composed, showing none of the adrenaline rush that typically followed a violent confrontation. Harrison sat slumped against the wall where she had left him, still nursing his bruised ribs, while Tony had regained consciousness but remained disoriented and confused about what had happened to him. Detective Santos approached Sarah first, notepad in hand and curiosity evident in her expression. "I'm Detective Santos, Seattle PD. I understand you were involved in an altercation here tonight." Sarah nodded, slipping back into her Tor's persona with practiced ease. "3 men were harassing me. When I refused their advances, things escalated. I defended myself." Santos looked from Sarah's small frame to the 2 much larger Marines, who were now receiving medical attention from the paramedics who had arrived with the police. "You defended yourself against 3 trained Marines." "I took some self-defense classes in college," Sarah replied with a modest shrug. "I guess the training stuck better than I thought it would." The detective's skepticism was obvious, but before she could press further, Harrison struggled to his feet and pointed an accusatory finger at Sarah. "That woman is not who she claims to be. No civilian fights like that. She's got to be military, probably special forces or something." Sarah maintained her innocent expression while internally cursing Harrison's perceptiveness. "I don't know what he's talking about, officer. I'm a graphic designer. I just moved here from Portland for work." Detective Santos studied Sarah's face carefully, looking for tells that might indicate deception. What she saw was a young woman who appeared genuinely confused by the Marine's accusations, but there was something in her eyes that suggested hidden depths. "Can I see some identification?" Tours. Sarah produced a Washington state driver's license that had been created by the CIA's document specialists. It showed her address as a downtown apartment that was actually maintained as a safe house for undercover operatives. "Look, I just want to finish my drink and go home. These men attacked me and I defended myself. Isn't that what anyone would do?" Harrison wasn't giving up. Despite his obvious pain, he pushed forward with his accusations. "Check her hands, detective. Look at the calluses. Those aren't from typing on a computer. And did you see how she moved? That wasn't some weekend self-defense class. That was professional combat training." Sarah extended her hands toward Detective Santos, palms up. The calluses Harrison mentioned were indeed present, but they were consistent with someone who worked out regularly with weights. Her cover story included membership at a local gym where she supposedly maintained her fitness routine. "I work out a lot," she said simply. "And I do rock climbing on weekends. That's where most of the calluses come from." Tony, who had finally recovered enough to speak coherently, supported his friend's version of events. "She moved like a machine, detective. 1 second Jake was grabbing her wrist, the next second he was flying across the room. And she knocked me out with 1 hit. Normal people can't do that." Detective Santos found herself in an unusual position. The evidence clearly supported Sarah's claim of self-defense. The 3 Marines were intoxicated. They had initiated the confrontation, and witness statements from other bar patrons confirmed that Harrison had grabbed Sarah's wrist against her will. However, the Marines' injuries and their insistence that Sarah possessed advanced combat training raised serious questions about her true identity. "Ms. Torres," Detective Santos said carefully, "I'm going to need you to come down to the station with me. Not under arrest, but I'd like to get a more detailed statement about what happened here tonight." Sarah nodded agreeably, though her mind was already working on contingency plans. A trip to the police station would mean fingerprinting and possibly a more thorough background check. Her Tor's identity would hold up under routine scrutiny, but if Detective Santos decided to dig deeper, things could become complicated quickly. As they prepared to leave Murphy's bar, Sarah caught sight of a familiar figure entering through the front door. The arms dealer she had been tracking had finally arrived for what was supposed to be a routine business meeting. He was a tall, lean man in his 40s with graying temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to danger. His dark eyes swept the room, taking in the police presence and the obvious aftermath of violence. His gaze lingered on Sarah for just a moment, but it was enough for her to see the recognition in his eyes. Not recognition of her true identity, but recognition of what she represented. Like Harrison, had enough experience with trained killers to recognize one when he saw one, regardless of what civilian clothes they might be wearing. Sarah realized that her cover operation had just become exponentially more complex. Not only did she have to deal with Detective Santos's suspicions, but she also had to figure out how to re-establish contact with now that her carefully crafted civilian persona had been compromised. The arms dealer would never trust Torres, the graphic designer, but he might be intrigued by someone who could single-handedly defeat 3 Marines. As Detective Santos escorted her toward the police car, Sarah caught his eye and gave him a barely perceptible nod. It was a calculated risk, a signal that she was someone worth knowing despite the current circumstances. His response was equally subtle, a slight tilt of his head that indicated he had received the message and found it interesting. The ride to the police station was conducted in relative silence, with Detective Santos occasionally glancing at Sarah in the mirror. Sarah used the time to refine her story and prepare for the more intensive questioning that was sure to come. She would need to be Torres, but a version of Torres who had hidden depths that might explain her fighting ability without revealing her true military background. The Seattle Police Department's downtown precinct was a busy place even at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Detective Santos led Sarah through a maze of desks and cubicles to a small interview room equipped with recording equipment and the kind of institutional furniture that was designed for durability rather than comfort. Sarah had been in similar rooms before, though usually on the other side of the questioning process when interrogating captured enemy operatives. "Can I get you some coffee or water?" Detective Santos offered as she set up the recording equipment. "Coffee would be great, thanks." Sarah had learned long ago that accepting small courtesies helped establish rapport with questioners and made her seem more cooperative and trustworthy. When Detective Santos returned with 2 cups of coffee, she settled into the chair across from Sarah and activated the recording equipment. "This is Detective Santos, case number 2024-7831, interviewing Torres regarding an incident at Murphy's bar on 2nd Avenue. Ms. Torres, you understand that you're not under arrest and you're free to leave at any time." "I understand." "Good, now let's start from the beginning. What brought you to Murphy's bar tonight?" Sarah had anticipated this question and had prepared an answer that was both truthful and misleading. "I had a rough day at work and needed to unwind. I've been there a few times since moving to Seattle, and it seemed like a quiet place to have a drink and think." "What kind of work do you do?" "Freelance graphic design. I specialize in corporate logos and marketing materials. I recently finished a big project for a tech startup, and the client wasn't happy with the final product. It's been stressful trying to resolve the situation." Detective Santos made notes as Sarah spoke, occasionally looking up to study her expression. "Tell me about the 3 Marines who approached you." Sarah recounted the evening's events, sticking closely to the truth while downplaying her own fighting skills and emphasizing the Marines' aggressive behavior. She described Harrison's initial approach, his refusal to accept her polite rejection, and the escalation that led to physical contact. "When he grabbed your wrist, what went through your mind?" Detective Santos asked. "I was scared," Sarah replied, allowing a hint of vulnerability to creep into her voice. "I've heard too many stories about women being assaulted by drunk men in bars. When he wouldn't let go and started pulling me toward the back of the bar, I knew I was in serious trouble. So you decided to fight back. I reacted instinctively. Like I said, I took some self-defense classes in college. We learned about pressure points and how to use an attacker's momentum against them. I guess muscle memory took over. Detective Santos leaned back in her chair, studying Sarah with the kind of intensity that had made her an effective interrogator. Ms. Torres, I've been a police officer for 15 years. I've seen a lot of bar fights and a lot of self-defense situations. What you did tonight goes well beyond anything they teach in a typical self-defense class. Sarah met the detective's gaze steadily. Maybe I'm a better student than most people, or maybe the Marines weren't as tough as they thought they were. Alcohol can really affect someone's coordination and judgment. The Marine who accused you of being military, Corporal Harrison, seemed pretty convinced about his assessment. He said you moved like a professional soldier. I don't know what to tell you about that, Detective. I've never been in the military. I went straight from high school to college to study art and design. I can show you my portfolio if you'd like. Detective Santos made a note to follow up on that offer. A professional portfolio would be another piece of the tour's identity that could be. What about family? Anyone who could vouch for your background? This was dangerous territory for Sarah. Her real family believed she worked in logistics for the Army and had no idea about her actual role in special operations. Her cover identity needed a family history that could be without compromising her real relatives. My parents died in a car accident when I was in college. I don't have any siblings. Most of my friends are scattered around the country, and I haven't kept in close touch with people from school. It was a sad but plausible story that would explain why Torres seemed to have appeared in Seattle without deep local connections. Detective Santos made more notes, then shifted her approach. Let's talk about your physical fitness routine. Corporal Harrison mentioned calluses on your hands that seemed inconsistent with computer work. Sarah held up her hands again, displaying the calluses that were actually the result of years of military training. Rock climbing, like I mentioned, and I do CrossFit workouts at a gym downtown. High-intensity interval training, weight lifting, rope climbing. It's pretty demanding physically, but it helps me deal with stress. Which gym? Iron Peak Fitness on Pine Street. Sarah had actually visited the gym several times as part of establishing her cover, and the staff there would remember Torres as a serious but friendly regular customer. Detective Santos continued her questioning for another hour, probing various aspects of Sarah's background and cover story. She asked about Sarah's apartment, her work history, her reasons for moving to Seattle, and her activities since arriving in the city. Each question was designed to test the consistency of the tour's identity and look for cracks that might reveal the truth underneath. Sarah answered each question with the kind of detail that came from thorough preparation and professional training in maintaining cover identities. She spoke about her fictional college experience, her imaginary freelance clients, and her supposed adjustment to life in a new city. The story was complex enough to be believable, but simple enough to remember consistently. As the interview progressed, Sarah began to sense that Detective Santos was beginning to accept the tour's persona, though she still harbored doubts about the evening's events. The detective's questions became less confrontational and more routine, focusing on procedural details rather than challenging Sarah's fundamental credibility. Ms. Torres, Detective Santos said as she concluded her questioning, I want you to know that you're not in any trouble here. Based on witness statements and the evidence, it's clear that you were defending yourself against an unwanted assault. However, I'm concerned about your safety going forward. What do you mean? Corporal Harrison and his friends might not let this go. Military pride can be a powerful motivator for revenge, especially when alcohol and humiliation are involved. I'd recommend varying your routine for the next few weeks and being extra cautious about your personal security. Sarah nodded seriously, though she was far more worried about his reaction to the evening's events than she was about 3 drunk Marines. I'll be careful, Detective. Thank you for your concern. One more thing, Detective Santos said as she gathered her notes. If your story checks out, and I believe it will, you might want to consider a career in law enforcement or private security. The kind of skills you displayed tonight could be very valuable in the right profession. Sarah smiled modestly. I'll keep that in mind, but right now I'm happy with graphic design. It's much less stressful than what happened tonight. As Detective Santos escorted her back through the precinct, Sarah noticed several officers looking at her with curiosity and respect. Word had apparently spread about the young woman who had taken down 3 Marines, and she could see the speculation in their eyes. Some probably suspected there was more to her story, but without evidence, suspicion was all they would have. Outside the police station, Sarah declined Detective Santos's offer of a ride home and instead called a taxi. As she waited for her transportation, she noticed a familiar car parked across the street. Sat behind the wheel, watching her with obvious interest. When their eyes met, he gestured for her to approach his vehicle. Sarah's mission had taken an unexpected turn, but perhaps not an entirely unwelcome one. The confrontation at Murphy's bar had blown her cover as an innocent graphic designer, but it had also provided her with a new identity that might actually be more useful for getting close to. Instead of Tors the civilian, she could now be Tors the woman with hidden skills and a mysterious past. As she walked towards car, Sarah prepared for the next phase of her operation. The night that had started as routine surveillance had become something much more complex, but she had been trained to adapt to changing circumstances. Whatever wanted to discuss, she would be ready for it. Sarah approached black BMW with measured steps, her senses alert for any sign of danger while maintaining the appearance of casual curiosity. Rolled down the passenger window as she drew near, his weathered face bearing the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. In the dim light from the street lamps, she could see that he was alone in the vehicle, though her training made her automatically scan the surrounding area for potential backup or surveillance. "That was quite a performance back there," said, his voice carrying a slight accent that Sarah recognized as Colombian. "I don't think I've ever seen 3 Marines handled so efficiently by someone so." He paused, looking her up and down, unassuming. Sarah adopted a cautious but intrigued expression, playing the part of someone who was both flattered and wary of unexpected attention from a stranger. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" "Not yet, but I have a feeling we should get to know each other." He extended his hand through the window. "I was supposed to meet some business associates at Murphy's tonight, but it seems the evening's entertainment was much more interesting than anything they might have had to discuss." Sarah shook his hand, nodding the calloused palm and firm grip of someone who had seen his share of physical work. "Tours, and it wasn't exactly entertainment from my perspective. Those men wouldn't take no for an answer. Which is why I'm impressed. Most people in your situation would have screamed for help or tried to run away. Instead, you handled the problem yourself with remarkable efficiency." Gestured toward the passenger seat. "Would you like to get in? I'd like to buy you a drink and hear more about how a graphic designer comes to possess such unusual skills." Sarah hesitated, as any sensible civilian would when invited into a stranger's car at night. But after a moment, she opened the passenger door and slid into the leather seat. "I suppose I could use a drink after the evening I've had, but somewhere public if you don't mind." "Of course, I know a place." Put the car in gear and pulled away from the police station. "Tell me, Ms. Tors, what really brings you to Seattle? The truth this time, not the story you told the detective." The question caught Sarah off guard, though she was careful not to let her surprise show. Was clearly more perceptive than she had anticipated, and she would need to recalibrate her approach accordingly. "What makes you think I wasn't telling the truth?" "Several things. First, your fighting technique. I've seen enough combat to recognize professional training when I see it. Second, the way you handled the police questioning. Most people would have been shaken up after a violent confrontation, but you were completely composed. Third, and most telling, the way you nodded to me as you were leaving the bar. That wasn't the action of a random civilian caught up in an unexpected situation." Navigated through the downtown streets with the confidence of someone who knew the city well. Sarah used the time to study him more closely, noting details that hadn't been included in his intelligence file. He wore expensive clothes, but not flashy ones, suggesting someone who had money but didn't feel the need to advertise it. His hands showed old scars that spoke of a violent past, and there was a wariness in his posture that indicated he was constantly ready for trouble. "You're very observant, mister," Sarah said finally. "Perhaps too observant for your own good." "In my line of work, observation is a survival skill. People who don't pay attention to details tend to have shorter." "And what line of work is that?" Smiled, and this time it did reach his eyes. "Let's just say I facilitate transactions between people who have certain needs and people who have the resources to meet those needs. It's a service industry, you might say." They pulled into the parking lot of an upscale hotel bar in the district. The establishment was quiet and dimly lit, with the kind of atmosphere that encouraged private conversations. Led Sarah to a corner booth where they could speak without being overheard and ordered top-shelf whiskey for both of them. "Now then," said once their drinks arrived, "why don't you tell me what you're really doing in Seattle? I'm guessing it has something to do with me, given the remarkable coincidence of your presence at Murphy's tonight." Sarah had anticipated this moment during the drive from the police station, was too smart to believe in coincidences, and she needed to give him a version of the truth that would satisfy his curiosity while advancing her mission objectives. The key was to make him think he was discovering her secrets rather than having them handed to him. "You're right that I'm not just a graphic designer," she admitted, allowing a note of resignation to enter her voice. "Though that is part of what I do for cover. I work for a private security firm that specializes in asset recovery and personnel protection. My current assignment involves tracking down someone who stole some very valuable property from one of our clients." It was a cover story that had enough truth to be convincing while explaining both her fighting skills and her presence in Seattle. Private military contractors were common enough that would be familiar with the industry, and the asset recovery angle would explain why she might be interested in his operations. Leaned back in his seat, studying her with renewed interest. "Asset recovery, that's a dangerous business, especially for someone working alone. What kind of asset are we talking about?" "Military hardware. Weapons, communications equipment, body armor, the kind of material that would be very valuable to certain buyers." Sarah let the implication hang in the air, watching his reaction carefully. His eyes sharpened with obvious interest. "And you think your thief might be operating in Seattle?" "The trail leads here. We've been tracking shipments and financial transactions for months. Someone is moving stolen military equipment through the Pacific Northwest, and we need to identify the responsible parties." Was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Sarah could see him weighing the potential risks and benefits of continuing the conversation. On one hand, she represented a possible threat to his operations. On the other hand, she might also represent an opportunity. "This client of yours," said finally, "are they government or private sector?" "Private, a defense contractor who's had several shipments go missing during transport. They've decided to handle the recovery themselves rather than involve federal authorities for obvious reasons." Sarah was walking a fine line with this explanation. She needed to make believe that she represented a potential business opportunity rather than a law enforcement threat, while also establishing credentials that would make him take her seriously. The suggestion that her fictional client wanted to avoid federal involvement would appeal to someone in his position. "I see. And what makes you think I might know something about your missing assets?" Sarah smiled and took a sip of her whiskey. "I didn't say I thought you knew anything about them, but you clearly move in circles where such information might be available. I'm hoping we might be able to help each other." "How so?" "You facilitate transactions, as you put it. I need to locate stolen property and the people who stole it. Perhaps there's a way for both of us to profit from the situation." Was silent for several minutes, clearly thinking through the implications of what Sarah was proposing. She could see the calculation in his eyes as he weighed the potential benefits against the risks. Finally, he reached a decision. "Ms. Torres, I think you and I should continue this conversation in a more private setting. There are some people I'd like you to meet, and some things I'd like to show you. But first, I need some assurance that you are who you claim to be." "What kind of assurance?" "References, contact information for your employer, some way to verify that you're legitimate." Sarah had anticipated this request and had prepared accordingly. "I can arrange that, but it will take some time and my employers value their privacy. Any background check would need to be reciprocal." "Meaning?" "Meaning I'd need the same kind of verification about you and your operation. My clients didn't get where they are by being careless about their business partners." Laughed, a genuine sound of amusement and respect. "I like you, Ms. Torres. You think like a professional. Very well, we'll exchange references and credentials. But in the meantime, perhaps you'd be interested in seeing some examples of the kind of merchandise that moves through Seattle's underground market." This was exactly the kind of opening Sarah had been hoping for. An invitation to cease operation would provide invaluable intelligence about his network and methods. "I'd be very interested," she said. "Excellent. Tomorrow night, then. I'll pick you up at your apartment." Sarah nodded, though internally she was already planning the security arrangements that would be necessary. Knowing her cover address was a potential vulnerability, but it was also a sign that he was taking her seriously as a potential business partner. What time? 8 o'clock, and Ms. Torres. The expression became more serious. The people you'll be meeting tomorrow night are not as forgiving as I am when it comes to deception or betrayal. If you're not what you claim to be, or if you're working with law enforcement, the consequences would be severe. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Mister, I assure you that my only interest is in recovering my client's property and being properly compensated for my efforts. I have no desire to complicate my life by involving myself in anyone else's business. Good, then we understand each other. Finished his drink and signaled for the check. I'll have my people look into your background tonight. I suggest you do the same with me. If we're both satisfied with what we learn, tomorrow night could be the beginning of a profitable relationship. As they left the hotel bar, offered to drive Sarah back to her apartment. During the short trip, she continued to play her role as a private contractor looking for business opportunities, asking casual questions about Seattle's underground economy and the kinds of people worked with. His answers were vague but informative, painting a picture of a sophisticated network that dealt in everything from stolen military hardware to illegal weapons manufacturing. When they reached Sarah's apartment building, walked her to the front entrance like a gentleman. Until tomorrow night, Ms. Torres. I look forward to learning more about your particular skills and how they might complement our operation. Sarah watched from her apartment window as drove away, then immediately activated the secure communication equipment hidden in her bedroom closet. She needed to contact her handler and update him on the evening's unexpected developments. The mission had taken a dramatic turn, but it was progressing faster than anyone had anticipated. Major Tom Bradley answered the encrypted satellite phone on the second ring. As Sarah's commanding officer and mission coordinator, he had been expecting regular updates on her progress with the investigation. He was not, however, expecting to hear that his operative had been forced to blow her cover after being attacked by drunk Marines. Jesus Christ, Bradley said after Sarah finished briefing him on the evening's events. When you told me you were going to get close to, I assumed it would take weeks or months. I didn't expect you to end up in his car on the first night. The situation developed faster than anticipated, sir. But I think the change in approach might actually work in our favor. Is more likely to trust a fellow professional than he would be to notice some random civilian. Maybe, but this new cover story creates its own problems. He's going to want verification of your credentials, and he's smart enough to spot any inconsistencies. The CIA's document people are good, but they're not miracle workers. Sarah had been thinking about this challenge during the drive back to her apartment. I have an idea about that, sir. What if we give him exactly what he's looking for? Real references from real people, but people who are working for us. Explain. We have assets in the private military contractor community. People who done work for us in the past and who owe us favors. Set up a shell company, create a paper trail for the fictional asset recovery job, and have our contacts vouch for Torres as a legitimate operator. Checks us out, finds exactly what he expects to find, and never realizes that the whole thing is an elaborate deception. Major Bradley was quiet for a moment, considering the proposal. It's risky. Using real people in the cover story increases the chances of exposure, but given the accelerated timeline, it might be our best option. I'll make some calls tonight and see what I can put together. There's something else, sir. Mentioned having people look into my background tonight. If he's as connected as we think he is, he might have sources inside law enforcement. The Seattle police have my fingerprints and a detailed statement about tonight's incident. I'll handle that. Detective Santos will find that her investigation has been classified for national security reasons, and all records related to the case will be transferred to federal custody. As far as the Seattle PD is concerned, Torres never existed. Sarah felt a moment of regret about Detective Santos, who had seemed like a competent and honest police officer. But operational security had to take precedence over personal relationships, even brief ones. What about the 3 Marines? They saw what I could do, and at least one of them suspects I'm military. They'll be transferred to different bases and given new assignments that will keep them very busy for the foreseeable future. By the time they have a chance to think about what happened in Seattle, this operation will be long over. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes as Sarah and Major Bradley worked out the details of her expanded cover story and the support she would need for the next phase of the mission. When they finally disconnected, Sarah felt both excited and apprehensive about what lay ahead. Tomorrow night, she would be entering the heart of operation, where one mistake could cost her life. But that was tomorrow night. Tonight, she had preparations to make and a role to perfect. Tors, the asset recovery specialist, needed to be every bit as convincing as Tors, the graphic designer, had been. The success of the mission, and possibly Sarah's survival, depended on it. As she prepared for bed, Sarah reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. A few hours ago, she had been a simple undercover operative conducting routine surveillance. Now she was playing a much more dangerous game with much higher stakes. But this was what she had trained for, what she had dedicated her life to. Tomorrow night, she would find out just how good she really was. The following evening arrived with the kind of persistent drizzle that made Seattle famous, turning the city's streets into a patchwork of reflected neon and shadow. Sarah spent the day in her safe house apartment, reviewing intelligence files on known associates, and preparing for what could be the most crucial phase of her mission. Major Bradley's contacts had worked through the night to establish the Tor's backstory, creating a digital paper trail that would satisfy even thorough investigation. At precisely 8 o'clock, BMW pulled up to Sarah's apartment building. She watched from her window as he exited the vehicle and surveyed the street with the practiced eye of someone who had survived in dangerous professions by never taking security for granted. Sarah grabbed her jacket and headed downstairs, nodding that was not alone this time. A second man sat in the passenger seat, though she couldn't make out his features through the tinted windows. Ms. Tors greeted her with a professional smile as she emerged from the building. "I hope you had a productive day." "I certainly did." "Very productive," Sarah replied, interpreting his words as confirmation that he had investigated her background and found it satisfactory. "I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to show me." Opened the rear door for her, and Sarah slid into the backseat behind the passenger. As her eyes adjusted to the dim interior light, she got her first look at its companion. He was a large, heavily muscled man in his 30s with Slavic features and the kind of alert posture that screamed military training. His name, according to Sarah's intelligence files, was a former Russian operator who now worked as chief of security. "Ms. Tors, meet," said as he pulled away from the curb. He was curious to meet the woman who handled 3 Marines so efficiently. Turned in his seat to study Sarah with pale blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance and bearing. "Impressive work last night," he said in accented English, "though Marines are not as tough as they believe themselves to be." Sarah smiled diplomatically. "They were drunk and careless. I was lucky." "Luck had little to do with it," replied. "I have seen the security footage from the bar. Your technique was very precise, very professional. Where did you train?" This was dangerous territory. Sarah had anticipated questions about her background, but expertise would make him harder to deceive than most people. "Private instructors, mostly. Former military people who needed work after leaving the service. I've always been a good student." Nodded slowly, but Sarah could see that he wasn't entirely convinced. She would need to be very careful around him going forward. Drove them through the industrial district south of downtown, where warehouses and shipping facilities lined the banks of the river. The area was largely deserted at this hour, with only the occasional truck rumbling through the wide streets. Finally, he turned into the parking lot of what appeared to be a legitimate import-export business, complete with corporate signage and loading docks. "Welcome to Pacific Northwest Trading Company," said as he parked near a side entrance. "We handle a variety of goods for clients who value discretion above all else." The building was larger than it appeared from the outside, with multiple warehouses connected by a central office complex. Led Sarah and through a series of security checkpoints, each staffed by armed guards who clearly knew their business. Sarah memorized every detail of the layout and security procedures, information that would be crucial for any future law enforcement action. "As you can see, we take security very seriously here," commented as they waited for a final checkpoint to clear their passage. "We've found that discretion and protection go hand in hand in our line of work." The main warehouse was a revelation. Row upon row of military equipment filled the vast space, from small arms and ammunition to sophisticated communications gear and vehicle parts. Sarah recognized equipment from multiple sources, including items that matched descriptions of materiel reported stolen from various military installations over the past 2 years. This was clearly the hub of a major arms trafficking operation, far larger than anyone had suspected. "Impressive inventory," Sarah said, working to keep her voice professionally appreciative rather than shocked. "Your supply chain must be very reliable." "We have sources throughout the military-industrial complex," replied with obvious pride. "Soldiers, contractors, logistics personnel, even some officers who grown disillusioned with their service. Everyone has needs, and we're very good at meeting them." As they walked through the warehouse, Sarah noted the presence of several other people who were clearly not simple employees. There was a woman in her 40s who was examining communications equipment with the kind of expertise that suggested advanced technical training. Two men in expensive suits were having a quiet conversation near a display of assault rifles, occasionally pointing to specific weapons as if placing an order. "Business is good, I see," Sarah observed. "Business is excellent," confirmed. "Which brings us to why you're here. You mentioned that you're looking for specific stolen items on behalf of a client. Perhaps we can help each other." They reached a smaller section of the warehouse that had been converted into an office area, complete with conference table and high-end audio-visual equipment. Gestured for Sarah to take a seat while positioned himself near the door, a subtle but clear indication that this was both a business meeting and a potential interrogation. "Before we proceed," said, settling into the chair across from Sarah, "I should mention that my background check on you and your organization was quite thorough. Tor's asset recovery specialist for security solutions. Former military, specialized training in combat and intelligence gathering. Very impressive credentials." Sarah nodded, though internally she was amazed at how quickly Major Bradley's people had constructed such a convincing false identity. The Security Solutions website had apparently been created overnight, complete with corporate history, client testimonials, and employee profiles. "I hope you found everything satisfactory." "More than satisfactory. In fact, one of your former colleagues spoke very highly of your work. Jack said you were the best field operative he'd ever worked with." Sarah recognized the name from her briefing. Was a former CIA operative who now ran a legitimate private security firm and occasionally did contract work for the agency. His endorsement of the fictional Tors would carry significant weight with someone like. "Jack's a good man," Sarah replied. "We've worked together on several recovery operations. Did he mention the Caracas job?" "He did indeed. Recovering stolen military hardware from a Venezuelan general's private collection required considerable skill and courage. I'm beginning to understand why your current client chose you for this assignment." Activated the room's presentation system, and a detailed map of the Pacific Northwest appeared on the wall-mounted screen. Red markers indicated various locations throughout Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. "Now then, let's discuss your missing assets. According to the information you provided, your client believes someone has been systematically stealing military equipment during transport and then reselling it through underground networks. Is that correct?" "Essentially, yes. We've tracked financial transactions and shipping records that suggest a sophisticated operation with connections inside military logistics. The thefts have been carefully planned to avoid detection for as long as possible." Highlighted several locations on the map. "These are known transfer points for stolen military equipment in this region. If your items have passed through the Pacific Northwest, they've likely been processed through at least one of these facilities." Sarah studied the map carefully, noting that several of the marked locations corresponded to sites that had been under surveillance by other federal agencies. This intelligence would be invaluable for coordinating law enforcement efforts across multiple jurisdictions. "What kind of processing are we talking about?" she asked. "Serial number removal, modifications to avoid detection, sometimes complete disassembly and reassembly with different components. The goal is to make stolen equipment untraceable and suitable for resale to clients who don't ask too many questions about provenance." Spoke up from his position near the door. "Ms. Tors, perhaps you could tell us more specifically what items your client is seeking to recover. The more details we have, the better we can assist you." Sarah had prepared for this question, basing her response on actual equipment thefts that had been reported to federal authorities. Primarily communications equipment, encrypted radio systems, satellite uplinks, data processing units. Also some specialized weapons and ammunition. The total value is estimated at around $12 million. Whistled softly. 12 million, that's a significant loss. Your client must be very motivated to recover these assets. Motivated enough to authorize substantial recovery fees. They're prepared to pay 20% of the recovered value, plus expenses. The mention of a multi-million-dollar recovery fee got some immediate attention. Sarah could see him calculating the potential profit from helping her locate the stolen equipment, especially since he likely already knew where some of it was located. 20% would be substantial compensation, acknowledged. But locating stolen military equipment is dangerous work. There are people in this business who don't appreciate others interfering with their operations. I understand the risks. That's why I'm hoping to work through established channels rather than trying to recover the items myself. My client prefers negotiated settlements to confrontations whenever possible. Exchanged a meaningful look with before responding. Ms. Torres, I believe we may be able to help you. However, such assistance would require a more formal business arrangement than what we've discussed so far. What kind of arrangement? A partnership. Security would become a preferred contractor for Pacific Northwest Trading Company. In exchange for our assistance with your current recovery operation, you would provide consultation services for our other clients who occasionally need specialized expertise. Sarah understood that was essentially offering to recruit her into his criminal organization. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that could provide unprecedented access to his entire network, but it also represented a significant escalation in the danger she faced. That's an interesting proposal, she said carefully. What kind of consultation services are we talking about? Asset evaluation, client background verification, security consulting. Occasionally, we have clients who require more. Active services, bodyguard work, facility security, sometimes recovery of assets that have been inappropriately acquired by competitors. The euphemistic language didn't disguise what was really describing. He was looking for someone who could handle enforcement activities for his criminal enterprise, including theft, intimidation, and possibly violence against rival operations. I'd need to discuss this with my superiors Sarah replied. But in principle, it sounds like a mutually beneficial arrangement. How would you propose we proceed? Smiled, clearly pleased by her apparent willingness to consider his offer. First, we locate your client's stolen equipment. Consider this a demonstration of our capabilities and a test of our compatibility as business partners. If the recovery operation goes smoothly and everyone is satisfied with the results, we can formalize a longer-term relationship. And if my client's equipment happens to be in the hands of people who don't want to return it peacefully, then we demonstrate why it's better to cooperate with us than to oppose us, said quietly from his position by the door. Sarah felt a chill at the matter-of-fact way the Russian delivered what was clearly a threat of violence. She was getting a clearer picture of how organization operated, and it wasn't pretty. But she was also gathering the kind of intelligence that could ultimately bring down the entire network. When can we start? She asked. Tomorrow, I have some contacts to reach out to, and I want to review our current inventory to see if any of your clients' missing items might already be in our possession. Stood and extended his hand. Welcome to the partnership, Ms. Torres. I have a feeling this is going to be very profitable for all of us. As they shook hands, Sarah couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. Believed he had just recruited a valuable new asset for his criminal enterprise. In reality, he had just given a federal undercover operative unprecedented access to his entire operation. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The drive back to Sarah's apartment was filled with casual conversation about the logistics of their new partnership. Spoke enthusiastically about the potential for expanded operations and increased profits, while remained largely silent but watchful. Sarah played her part as the interested professional, asking appropriate questions and making suggestions that reinforced her cover identity. When they reached her apartment building, walked her to the entrance as he had the night before. Tomorrow morning, I'll send a car to pick you up at 10 o'clock. We'll start by reviewing our current inventory and then reach out to our network to begin tracking your client's missing equipment. I'll be ready, Sarah assured him. As she watched car disappear into the Seattle night, Sarah reflected on how quickly and dramatically her mission had evolved. 24 hours ago, She had been conducting routine surveillance. Now she was a trusted partner in a major criminal enterprise, with access to information and facilities that could provide law enforcement with everything they needed to dismantle S network. But with that access came unprecedented danger. Tomorrow, she would be working directly with people who wouldn't hesitate to kill her if they discovered her true identity. The margin for error was virtually non-existent, and any mistake could be fatal. Back in her apartment, Sarah activated her secure communication equipment and began preparing her report for Major Bradley. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but tonight she needed to make sure her superiors understood exactly what she had accomplished and what risks lay ahead. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself deeper inside the organization than any law enforcement officer had ever been. The partnership between Tor's and Pacific Northwest Trading Company had proven remarkably successful, at least from perspective. They had successfully recovered over $8 million worth of military equipment for Sarah's fictional client, with taking a substantial commission for his services. What didn't know was that each recovered item was immediately turned over to federal authorities, providing crucial evidence for the building case against his network. Sarah had also participated in several other operations that gave her insight into the full scope of his criminal empire. She had accompanied on collection runs where they retrieved equipment from corrupt military personnel, observed negotiations with international buyers who were purchasing weapons for overseas conflicts, and even participated in an intimidation campaign against a rival trafficking group that had encroached on his territory. Each operation provided valuable intelligence that Sarah dutifully reported to Major Bradley through their secure communication channels. The FBI and other federal agencies were building an airtight case that would ultimately result in dozens of arrests and the seizure of millions of dollars in stolen military hardware. But they were also waiting for the right moment to strike, hoping to capture not just the local network, but also the international buyers and suppliers who formed the backbone of the organization. That moment came on a rainy Thursday morning when called an emergency meeting of his senior associates. Sarah arrived at the Pacific Northwest Trading Company facility to find the parking lot filled with expensive cars and the building bustling with activity. Something big was happening, and from the expressions on people's faces, it wasn't entirely welcome news. Met Sarah at the security checkpoint, his usually confident demeanor replaced by obvious tension. "Thank God you're here. We have a serious problem and I need someone I can trust." "What's going on?" Sarah asked, falling into step beside him as they hurried toward the main conference room. "Federal task force raid last night. They hit 3 of our subsidiary operations in Portland, San Francisco, and Los Angeles simultaneously. Arrested 15 people and seized over $50 million worth of inventory." Sarah felt her stomach drop. If federal agents were conducting raids on his network, it meant that either her mission had been compromised or there was another investigation running parallel to her operation. Either possibility was dangerous, both for her personal safety and for the broader mission objectives. "Do we know how they found out about the operations?" she asked. "That's what we're trying to determine. The raids were too coordinated to be based on random intelligence. Someone either talked or there's a federal informant in the organization." They entered the conference room to find a dozen people seated around the large table, all looking worried and suspicious. Sarah recognized most of them from her previous weeks in the organization, including who was studying surveillance photos that had apparently been taken during the federal raids. "Ladies and," announced as he took his seat at the head of the table, "we have a serious security breach to address. As you all know by now, federal agents conducted simultaneous raids on 3 of our West Coast operations last night. This level of coordination suggests they have detailed intelligence about our activities." A woman named, who handled the organization's financial operations, spoke up first. "The timing is very suspicious. These raids happened just days before we were scheduled to complete the Kazakhstan deal. Someone knew about the timing and wanted to prevent that transaction." Sarah knew about the Kazakhstan deal from her intelligence reports. It involved the sale of advanced missile guidance systems to buyers who claimed to represent the government, but were actually fronts for terrorist organizations. Preventing that sale was worth far more than the arrests that would result from exposing Sarah's operation. "What are you suggesting?" asked. I'm suggesting that we have a federal informant in this room right now, she replied, her gaze sweeping across the assembled group. Someone who's been feeding information to law enforcement agencies. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as everyone began looking at their colleagues with new suspicion. Sarah maintained a neutral expression while internally calculating distances to exits and potential weapons. If her cover was blown, she would need to fight her way out of the building against a dozen armed criminals. Stood and walked to a whiteboard at the front of the room. I have been analyzing the raid reports and cross-referencing them with our operational timeline. The federal agents knew exactly where to find our most sensitive materials. They went straight to hidden storage areas and encrypted communication equipment. This wasn't a fishing expedition. He began writing names on the whiteboard, and Sarah was disturbed to see her own alias included in the list. These are the people who had access to information about all 3 raided facilities. If there is an informant in the organization, it has to be one of these individuals. Studied the list of names with obvious distress. These are my most trusted associates. I can't believe any of them would betray the organization. Belief is not relevant, replied coldly. We must deal with facts. Someone on this list has been communicating with federal authorities. Pulled out a tablet computer and began scrolling through financial records. I've been analyzing our payment records for the past month. Most of our associates have been spending money in patterns consistent with their normal lifestyles, but there are some anomalies. Sarah knew that this line of investigation could be dangerous for her. The Tor's cover identity included financial records that showed payments from the fictional security solutions, but those records might not hold up under intensive scrutiny. What kind of anomalies? Asked. Large cash deposits that don't correspond to any payments we've made. Someone has been receiving money from an outside source. Turned her tablet around so everyone could see the screen. According to these bank records, Tor's deposited $15,000 in cash into her account last week, money that didn't come from us. All eyes in the room turned to Sarah, who felt her carefully constructed cover story beginning to crumble. She needed to come up with a plausible explanation quickly, or this meeting would turn into an execution. That money came from my previous client, Sarah said, working to keep her voice steady. The defense contractor who hired me to recover their stolen equipment. They paid a completion bonus when we successfully located their missing inventory. Was already shaking his head. I contacted your supposed employer yesterday as part of my security review. Security Solutions exists, but they have no record of any employee named Tors. In fact, they have no record of any asset recovery operation involving stolen military equipment. Sarah felt the walls closing in around her, but she wasn't ready to give up her cover yet. That's impossible. I've been working for Jack's people for over 2 years. I also spoke with Jack, continued relentlessly. He has never heard of Tors, and he certainly never provided a reference for anyone by that name. Your entire identity is a fabrication. The room erupted in angry voices as associates realized they had been harboring a federal agent for 3 weeks. Sarah saw hands moving toward concealed weapons and knew she had only seconds before the situation turned violent. But before anyone could draw a gun, raised his hand for silence. Wait, he said quietly. Before we do anything irreversible, I want to hear what has to say for herself. If she really is a federal agent, she might be willing to make a deal that benefits everyone. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of people who minutes ago had considered her a trusted colleague and now saw her as a mortal enemy. She had 2 choices: maintain her cover and probably die, or reveal her true identity and hope she could negotiate her way out of the building alive. You're right, she said finally. Tors doesn't exist. My real name is Lieutenant Sarah, United States Army Special Forces. The admission sent another wave of agitation through the room, but seemed almost relieved to finally know the truth. Special Forces. That explains the fighting skills we witnessed at Murphy's bar. How long have you been investigating our organization? 6 months of preliminary investigation, 3 weeks undercover. But I'm not the only one. There are federal task forces from multiple agencies building cases against arms trafficking networks throughout the region. Stood up abruptly. We need to kill her right now and disappear before more federal agents arrive. Every minute she stays alive increases the danger to all of us. But was thinking strategically rather than emotionally. Not necessarily. Lieutenant might be more valuable to us alive than dead. She knows details about the federal investigation that could help us avoid future raids. Looked skeptical. You want to trust a federal agent who has been lying to us for 3 weeks. I want to make a deal with someone who understands that cooperation serves everyone's interests better than confrontation, replied. Lieutenant, what would you need to make the federal task forces back off and let us continue our operations? Sarah realized that was offering her a chance to become a genuine double agent, working for his organization while nominally maintaining her federal law enforcement role. It was an impossible situation that would require her to betray either her criminal associates or her military oath. I can't make that kind of deal, Sarah said firmly. My oath as an Army officer doesn't allow me to ignore criminal activity or obstruct federal investigations. Then you're of no use to us, said, pulling a pistol from her purse. And you're a direct threat to our freedom and possibly our lives. Sarah tensed for action but intervened again. Put the gun away. Killing a federal agent in our own facility would bring more attention than we can handle. We need a different solution. What kind of solution? Asked. Was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he came to a decision that surprised everyone in the room. We're going to let Lieutenant go. The announcement caused an uproar among his associates, but continued speaking over their objections. In exchange, she's going to deliver a message to her superiors, a message that might prevent further bloodshed and allow everyone to find a peaceful resolution to this situation. Sarah looked at suspiciously. What kind of message? Tell your federal task forces that we're prepared to surrender our domestic operations voluntarily. All stolen military equipment will be returned. All American customers will be identified and turned over to authorities, and key personnel will accept plea agreements in exchange for information about international buyers and suppliers. It was an unexpected offer that would give federal authorities everything they wanted while allowing and his core associates to avoid the most serious criminal charges. But Sarah wasn't sure if it was a genuine proposal or an elaborate trap. Why would you do that? She asked. Because the domestic arms trafficking business has become too dangerous and too heavily scrutinized. The real money is in international sales, and we can conduct that business from overseas locations where we'll be beyond the reach of American law enforcement. And exchanged worried glances, clearly unhappy with his decision to negotiate rather than fight. But they also understood that he was offering them a way to escape prosecution and continue their criminal careers elsewhere. You have 24 hours to deliver my proposal to your superiors and bring back their response, told Sarah. If they agree to the deal, we'll begin the surrender process immediately. If they refuse, or if you try to use this opportunity to set up a raid, then we'll hunt you down and kill you. Do we understand each other? Sarah nodded, though she knew that proposal would create significant complications for the federal investigation. Allowing the core members of the organization to escape overseas would eliminate any chance of prosecuting them for their crimes, even though it would recover millions of dollars in stolen equipment and provide valuable intelligence about international arms trafficking networks. I'll deliver your message, she agreed, but I can't guarantee what the response will be. I understand, but I think your superiors will find our offer attractive when they consider the alternatives. Gestured to, who escorted Sarah from the conference room and through the facility's security checkpoints. As they walked, Sarah memorized final details about the warehouse layout and personnel, information that would be crucial regardless of how the negotiations developed. At the exit, paused and looked at Sarah,